Okay, we're going to get started. Welcome to Higher Education, the podcast that explores career development in public education. I'm your host, Dr. Sarah Sergo, Chief of Staff for Frederick County Public Schools. And Higher Education is a podcast series that looks to explore different aspects of career development, interviewing experts, sharing practical advice, and talking to people in the field. Today, we're going to be experiencing a topic together that I think we all care about, which is work-life balance. So let's level up our skills. Thank you for tuning in to the September episode of Higher Education. This is our first episode for the 24-25 school year. So don't forget to go back and check out last year's episodes to learn more about those topics. But I'm really excited to be starting the year talking about a topic that I'm passionate about, which is work-life balance. And this is important no matter what your role is in any organization, in any field, but it's especially important in the era of education and education professionals. At a time when technology is so ever present and the ability to stay connected is with us all the time, we have to be very deliberate about maintaining well-being and work-life balance as professionals. So to guide us through this subject, I've asked two guests to the show today. First, we have Dr. Eric Lors-Phillips. He is the Associate Superintendent of Public Affairs. Dr. Lors-Phillips has been with FCPS for just over 20 years. He started his career in the classroom as an elementary teacher and worked his way up through administrative roles. He was a curriculum specialist and also has been the supervisor of Accelerated in Achievement and Equity before making his way into leading the Public Affairs Department. We also have with us Sherry Murphy, who's with us for the first time today on our podcast. Sherry's been with FCPS for over 15 years. She's filled a number of different roles in our secondary schools primarily. She's worked as a student support teacher, a school therapist, and currently is assistant principal at Frederick High School. Just this past school year, Sherry was named 2024 Maryland Assistant Principal of the Year from all school systems across the state. And we are so lucky to have her supporting our students each and every day. So before we dive into today's topic, I'd like our guests to have a chance to introduce themselves. And so I'd start with you, Dr. Lors-Phillips. Can you tell us a little bit about who you are and what you bring to our topic today?
Again, I'm Eric, and I serve as Dr. Sorgo mentioned, the Associate Superintendent of Public Affairs. And it's interesting because work-life balance, when I saw this particular topic, I thought it is really important and critical for me and for those that I serve with, but it's also something I'm constantly working on and trying to make sure that I have appropriate balance. So I'm looking forward to the conversation and to sharing a little bit about how I try to do that and the role in which I serve.
Thank you so much. We're really excited to dive into this topic with you as well. So now let's switch over to you, Sherry. Let's unlock your fast facts. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. My name again is Sherry Murphy. I'm currently the assistant principal at Frederick High School. I'm starting my 13th year in the role of assistant principal. I kind of came to this position in a unique path. So I was not a classroom teacher, but rather a licensed clinical social worker. And I've been providing mental health services to students in schools throughout my whole career. Prior to FCPS, I worked in Prince George's County and Washington, D.C.'s in some private and public schools from K to 12. And so I've kind of gone the spectrum. And I started out here in Frederick County in our Title I elementary schools as a school therapist, and then moved into a high school position. And then now I've landed myself into leadership. So I'm also excited to talk about my journey through the whole work-life balance, because like Eric, it's something that I continue to work on and continue to strive to improve for myself, probably on a daily basis. And also as a lift coach, working with new administrators, really talking with new administrators kind of, in their first couple of years, how to kind of start out right on that process. So I'm looking forward to this conversation as well.
Yeah, and I love how you both really talked about this topic as something you're still pursuing, even after so many years in your positions. And so that's a great place for us to start. So I want to start talking about what it actually means. When we say work-life balance, what are we actually talking about? And typically, work-life balance, we sort of imagine a virtual seesaw, and it's this equilibrium between the demands of our personal lives, personal interests, family commitments, other organizational interests, volunteering, whatever it might be that's in our personal life, and the sort of competing demand for that same resource of time and sort of focus from our professional lives. And, we don't want either one to dominate, right? And so I like to think of work-life balance more as a cycle. So, just like with a seesaw, there are some times when my personal life becomes a little bit more of a priority, and I'm sort of spending more time on that side of the seesaw. And then there's other times when I slide over, and my professional work is where I'm spending most of my time. And I find it helpful just to think of it as a cycle. So, nothing is going to be the way it is forever. And so sometimes it's like, oh my gosh, I've been working 12-hour days, and it's when to share it. To your point, if that's your normal, if that becomes the constant, that's when we start to say our work-life balance is sort of eroding. So I don't like to think of it as it's ever going to be a 50-50. It's sort of imagine like it's 60-40, it's 70-30, and you're sort of teetering back and forth based on the circumstances of whatever might be happening. And so one of the things that I have found is super important when you talk about work-life balance is how we put up boundaries. Boundaries are this sort of invisible fence, I like to say, that you have put up that explains like when you're on one side of the fence or another. And so, for me, I find that it's really helpful if I say dinner time is a boundary, right? Family dinners are very important in my personal life. And that's a time where when I'm home, I try not to be working on things, or maybe it might be weekends. I always say the work will always be there. So we have to set up boundaries in order to keep that balance. So I'd love to hear a little bit about your thoughts. All of us have been guilty probably in our life of reading emails right before we go to bed, or having periods of time where we're out of balance. But I'd like to hear some of your thoughts about how you work to model or help team members set and maintain the boundaries that are essential to creating work-life balance. So Eric, I'd love to start with you.
Yeah, and I think what I didn't share my background is, Sarah, you alluded to this. I started teaching in Montgomery County, and I've taught several different grade levels, and then moved into administration. And so over the past 26, 27 years in public education, I've seen that work-life balance for me and those setting of boundaries change, because the roles change, responsibilities change. But I think the one constant has been the things that are important to me outside of my professional life, making sure that I preserve that time, whether it be my faith-based community or other community service activities I'm involved in, time with family and friends. And I think in the role in which I serve now, you often hear the saying, clear is kind. And I think part of that is being very clear with the boundaries that I set for myself. So the role in which I serve now, I can get phone calls any time of day. Sometimes they roll in at 10 o'clock at night. Sometimes they're coming in on a Saturday. Sometimes they're coming in during the middle of Sunday service. So I'm getting those often. So one of the things that I try to do is when it comes to, for example, the media, I'm the point person for the school system for the media. And it's really helping them to appreciate and reminding them that FCPS is closed after 6 o'clock. So unless it's a critical emergency, we're not going to be contacting you to set up media inquiries after 6 o'clock or on Saturdays or Sundays or when offices and schools are closed. And then part of that is also setting up those boundaries for those media outlets. So if schools are closed and I get a media inquiry while offices are open, I'm not going to contact a teacher or somebody who's off that day to take a media inquiry. So I'm going to contact them and say, hey, look, you have to wait. So not only is it respecting my boundaries and saying, hey, look, you're not going to get email from me at 1 o'clock on a Saturday, but also doing that for our staff as well. And then the other thing is being careful with my personal information. So for example, I don't keep my work emails on my personal phone. I used to, but I haven't done that in several years now, because I need to have that separation. The other thing is for staff and for team members and for media outlets, they have my work mobile number, so they can use that. And then I'll monitor that. So if I have dedicated time that I'm with family, I'm not going to be checking that. Actually, let me clarify that. I do check it. I have to read it because depending on what it is, I have to respond to it. I do read it, and then I turn my phone back over and re-engage with family, friends, or whatever it is that I'm doing outside of the work time. Because if I don't do that, then what I find is I'm on all the time. And if I don't properly disconnect, then I can't connect in a meaningful way and give all that I can in those moments. The other reason that's beneficial is my team knows that I'm not going to reach out to them unless it is a crisis outside of work hours, because I typically don't do that. So those are some of the ways that I set boundaries, just being clear with folks. This is when I'm available. This is when I am not available. And this is when I'm going to look at the phone and not look at the phone.
Yeah, I think that's such a helpful, it's sort of this sort of sweet spot between, doing your job at a high level, recognizing that some of our jobs don't have a duty day, right, in the traditional sense, and yet being able to say, here's as much as I can give you in this context. I heard a wonderful quote that said, boundaries are the rules you establish that are spoken or unspoken about what others can expect from you and what you expect from others. And I really love that. One of the things that Dr. Dyson has always said, and why we sort of set that 6 o'clock time frame, is to say we recognize people work all kinds of hours. I might choose to sit down at 9 o'clock at night after my children go to bed and read through some things or go through that Google Doc that someone was waiting for me to give them feedback on. But I do not visit my work hours on someone else. And so that's another thing. It's like, do you visit something outside the workday on another person? And so I always say you work when it works for you, but you don't need to visit that on another person. And you can also tell another person when your visiting hours are up,
Exactly.
which is important. So, Sherry, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. As school-based administrator, I know my years as an assistant principal are a bit of a blur because I think that was probably when I had the worst work-life balance in my career. Tell me a little bit about what strategies you have found to be helpful and what you try to mentor and model for others.
Absolutely. So I agree with the boundaries, but also being comfortable advocating for yourself and putting limits on your workload and what you can do. Because oftentimes we're seen as, especially assistant principals, that we've got time and we can handle, and these are all the things that need to get done. But I think it's so important to advocate within your team as well as with your supervisor about just workload and how you're able to manage it. And if you're finding that you can't manage your workload within the confines of about an 8-hour day, 9-hour day, then you really need to talk with people about, is the workload too much, or what can give. I also think it's important as a supervisor that I'm respecting the boundaries of the staff that I supervise. One of the things that always resonates with me is the I want to say it's not really competition, but like the difference between those who have children at home and those that don't. And sometimes we put more on people that we feel like, well, no one's waiting for them at home necessarily. And so they could say a little bit later, as opposed to the one that has to go pick up their kids from daycare and that kind of stuff. And so I think it's so important as a leader to really be clear that whatever your personal life is and whatever it looks like, that we respect all of that, and that there isn't a different expectation based on what's waiting at home and what's not waiting at home. And so I think that's just really important that we have that respect for our staff. And then I think, again, just really clear communication with what you expect of your teachers and of the staff in your building, and not expecting, like you said, I'm not trying not to email people after certain times and that kind of stuff, and setting if it's easier for me to send the email at 9 o'clock, then try to set that timer so that it goes out at 6 o'clock in the morning or 7 o'clock in the morning. So I can do it when I feel like I need to, but like you said, it's not visiting my work hours on other people.
Yeah, those are some wonderful ideas. And what you talked about, sort of the to-do list,
Mhm.
which really reminds me of some of the strategies that are helpful to organize sort of all of the things that draw your attention. I love the quote, sort of, if everything is important, then nothing is important. And so I'm really a big fan of the Eisenhower matrix, which a lot of people may be familiar of, which is the notion of urgent versus important. And I used to have a secretary who was, she was sort of salt of the earth. And she used to have this sign on her desk that said, hold up, let me stop everything I'm doing and work on your emergency, which was always sort of it was something I thought about a lot, because I'm like, it does feel sometimes like everything is urgent. And the reality is it isn't. And so in this sort of notion of the Eisenhower matrix, you look at your to-do list in sort of that framework. Okay, here's the long list of things I need to do, tasks, conversations, projects, all those things. And so these are the urgent things. And so it's like the difference between your daily to-do list and your weekly or monthly to-do list. And so you just look at things, what's time sensitive and important, and what's time sensitive and urgent. And so, like, to Dr. Lors Phillips, he's frequently, I see him sort of making those determinations, particularly when we're doing crisis communication or things like that. And then the third quadrant would be things that are time sensitive, but they're not mission critical, right? So yes, I need to sign all those timesheets, or yes, I need to look at that, school improvement plan. But if I don't get it done today, I can move that to another thing. That's why I'm actually a really big fan of calendaring tasks. A lot of people tend to only calendar their meeting settings. I actually calendar tasks. I have to write this newsletter. I have to read that report. I have to draft a communication. I put them on my calendar so that if I don't get to them, they get slid over somewhere, but they have protected time. So I'd love to hear some of your thoughts. And Sherry, we'll start with you this time about the time management or organizational strategies that you use to help get yourself sort of out the door at the end of the day when that list will always be there.
Absolutely. So I kind of go into my day knowing what time I'm hoping to get out of the building that day. And so if there's no evening event, if my plan is to be out the door by 4:30, at about 4 o'clock, I look at kind of what's left and then make a plan for tomorrow, so that I'm not like starting the day trying to make a plan, but the plan exists when I walk in the door the next day. I also am a huge fan of calendars. People laugh at my calendar because it's very colorful, but different kinds of appointments have different colors. So
I'm the same way. I feel you on that. I'm the same way.
And so there are certain colors that I'm like, it's going to be a rough day. Certain colors that, that I really look forward to. And so I kind of just have a snapshot of my day. I can just look at the colors and know I've got like 4 meetings and a couple observations, those kinds of things. But I also schedule my tasks, because if I don't, I'll fill the time with something else. And then I won't get to the task that I really needed to get to, because there's always something to do and there's always something to fill the task. And so if it's something that I know for me is important and is kind of fills my bucket, I want to make sure I get to those things, like having positive conversations with students and doing classroom walkthroughs and those kinds of things, because I know for me that makes a better day for myself. And so making sure I'm scheduling more of those positive interactions, because as an AP, a lot of your interactions sometimes with staff and with students can be kind of negative and around behavior and those kinds of things. And so it's nice to schedule in some of that positive time during the day. And then I usually, in working with teachers, we talk about kind of their planning time and how they're structuring that planning time. So, because for high school, you have that 90-minute block of time. And so, have you thought about like maybe setting a timer for 30 minutes of, I'm going to do 30 minutes of grading and then 30 minutes of planning and then 30 minutes collaborating with someone else, so that, again, it's not just spent filling space, but you're purposeful with that planning time, so that you're able to spend more of your home time at home rather than doing some of those tasks that you need to get done for school.
Yeah, I love that. And what you said reminded me of, when I was a principal, I used to put bus arrival and dismissal on my calendar. I put lunchtime on my calendar. And sort of the idea was that those weren't just things happening in my building. Those were things I wanted to be present for. And so they always say your calendar tells a story about what's important to you. I'm not a big fan of putting all meetings that are happening in the building. My calendar should reflect what I am committed to doing. It's about me. If the school has a master calendar, if your department has a master calendar, you want to put FYIs on your calendar at the top, but your calendar should represent how you're spending your time. And so I love those ideas that you've shared to sort of color code, but to also, sort of put time on your schedule. Oh, I need to go observe this person. I'm also going to put time on my calendar to write up my notes. Mm-hmm. I'm also going to write, so all of those things are allowed and they are given a voice and a space on your calendar. I love that. Dr. Lors Phillips, what about you? What are some of the things that you do to keep yourself organized and get out the door and honor that time commitment?
Yeah, first of all, to cycle back to something that Sherry said, because you mentioned it a couple of different ways, but you mentioned in your first comment about advocating for yourself and for others. First of all, I just have to say, I appreciate you talked about advocating, not just for those that have families at home, but those that don't, and just understanding the different circumstances that people have in their lives and the need for that balance. But also, I view the calendar as a way of advocating for yourself as well.
Mhm.
I don't think my calendar is as sophisticated as you all sounds to be, but I do have colors on there. But I also have something else on there that I think really helps me. And I started putting that on there when I first assumed this role, and it's called Sacred. And that's how it's labeled on there. I didn't come up with a label. A former team member, Wanda Ford, came up with that for me. She said, that's just your time to read, do things that you need to do in the office. Um, and so while I don't always stick to that, it's there and it's constantly there. And basically, what that time allows me to do is professional reading.
Mm.
And during that time period, what I'll do is I have my computers here in front of me, but I actually have a space right here where I'm not looking at the computer screens at all. And it just allows me to focus in on something that I'm reading, information that I'm trying to take in without the distraction of emails coming in and that type of thing. So I can have that time to cognitively just focus on one specific thing.
Mhm.
So I have that set out on my calendar. I also have something else on there, and it's called Walk. That is just to get up away from my desk. And sometimes what I'll do is I'll take a walk outside. And typically I'm still doing emails or I'm on a phone call, but it allows me to be able to do something healthy aside from just sitting or standing in front of the computer the entire day. And it doesn't seem like a big deal, but that's something for me. I'm used to when I was a teacher and assistant principal, used to being in the school and moving around. So it helps me to be able to do that. Sometimes what I'll do is I'll, get up and I'll walk someplace else in the building downstairs to the rest of the team and check in on folks and things like that. So I have some purposeful things on my calendar outside of meetings and signing leave slips and things like that to remind me to do those things. But another thing and I've done this since my first year teaching actually, and it's something that I've kept. I typically get into the office probably an hour to 90 minutes, sometimes earlier than people typically are coming in. Because what that allows me to do is to go through emails. Because if I think for most of us, we could say, if you let us, we could spend an entire day just going through emails and responding. So first thing in the morning, I try to get through some emails if I didn't get them the day before, if they came in overnight, so that when the team starts coming in, I can make sure that I'm focused in on the team. And if nothing is popping off during the middle of a day, a crisis or something like that, I can really give my attention to them. So coming in early allows me to do that as well, so that at the end of the day, I can leave feeling that I'm not leaving too much behind as far as emails or other things that I haven't finished. It gives me that quiet time first thing in the morning.
Yeah, I love what you said about the focus time. You called it sacred time. Dr. Dyson calls it focus time. I used to call it sort of work time, but it's this idea of little small increments. People always like to say, I'm not someone who leads from my office. And it's like there are things that have to get done. And so you have permission to block off 30 minutes, an hour, multiple times a week to focus and to read and to do those things. I know our colleagues in organizational development introduced me to this idea of what they call on stage and backstage, which I love, or off stage and backstage. And so, when we look at planning meetings, which our colleagues in organizational development do with such precision, they don't just that just doesn't just happen, right? So there are times where they say you need to make sure you schedule off stage or backstage time to do the reading that you need to read to prepare, to look at videos and to look at source material before you are actually planning or doing the meeting. And I think that's another term. So sacred time, focus time, work time, or backstage time, all kinds of things that I think are helpful. And those are really important. I think the elephant in the room is we all have such an increasingly heavy workload. Sometimes it's just the nature of our jobs because we wear so many hats and because we're doers and we all like to step into a space where we're needed. But also sometimes there are places where we have to pick up the work of someone else because maybe they're trying to take care of themselves. Maybe someone needs to take leave or you're down a team member because of a vacancy. And so there's a lot of pressure to say yes, right? We're all sitting in these seats because we've said yes a lot, right? And to do that work that needs to be done. But, sometimes it's hard to put things to bed and say, I've done enough today. I'm a big disciple of Brene Brown and all of her work. And she talks about something called painting done. Painting, painting done. And she talked about this in her more recent work, Atlas of the Heart, when she says, it means sort of in your mind, walking through your own expectations of what done looks like. Right. And so, for example, as someone who recently worked on some big system wide projects like the Employee Code of Conduct and the Employee Handbook, I've reached a point where I had to say it's done. Right. Doesn't mean I don't want other things to become improved in it and it doesn't need to be better, but we have to sort of at some point reach a threshold of saying, and I don't want to say good enough in a negative way, but this is good work. I'm painting this done. And it's a very powerful tool she talks about to picture what done looks like, particularly with all of the demands that we have. So when you think about managing pressure, it might be pressure you put on yourself. It might be pressure you feel for the enormity of your responsibility. I'd love to hear your thoughts about how you combat some of those pressures that push us out of balance and how you deal with that. So Dr. Lourdes Phillips, I'll start with you this time. What strategies do you have to combat some of the pressures that sort of can easily send you out of whack in terms of work-life balance?
Yeah, I think part of it is just being very self-reflective in assessing myself. There's some times where I have to stop and say, am I going to be able to give my very best response right now? Or do I need to step away and come back to this? And sometimes coming back means you're giving yourself until the next business day. There's that pressure to respond right away to certain things, and responding right away is not always the best option. Sometimes you need to walk away, give yourself a beat, and then come back and respond. So I think some of it is just assessing how cognitively, how am I feeling? Am I tired? Am I going to really be able to think about this in a meaningful way that's going to benefit whoever it is I'm communicating with or supporting? And if not, then I need to get some rest and come back and do it the next day. And giving yourself that grace to be able to do that. I think in the school system, we've established some really good cultures, some really good culture rather, or some norms rather, I should say, for our culture. And one of that has to do with no emails after 6. And you mentioned it earlier, Sarah, about no emails after 6. I think that's really important. And it may not seem like a big deal, but it is. What I can say is, and I often will tell this to my team, the superintendent is not emailing me after 6 o'clock. And she is hit all the time by all sorts of information. I can probably count on a hand the number of times since I've been serving with Dr. Dyson that she's reached out after hours for something. Now, if it's critical, absolutely. There's some things that we have to communicate with each other about beyond 6 o'clock or on the weekend, but it doesn't happen on a regular basis. And so it's probably all of us are busy, but none of us has 7 bosses, I don't think. Is one of the busiest individuals in the organization to be able to say, hey, look, it's important that we have some time to pause at the end of the day to enjoy our family, our individual time, whatever it may be. I think that sends a big message, and I think that's really important. Another big piece is I know some people have mixed feelings about it. The majority of folks I talk to enjoy those summer hours, those Fridays off. I think that's a nice feature here. Not every school system does that. But that 3-day weekend, I think you see people come back Monday rejuvenated. Those 4 10-hour days are long days, but I think it's a nice thing that we do in the system in the summer to support that work-life balance and giving people more time for family, friends, or whatever it is they want to do during the summer months. And then again, I mentioned this before, and I'll say it again, that clear is kind. So is advocating for the time that members of our team need to complete tasks that they have so that they're not completing those tasks well beyond their workday because of all the other things that they're doing as well. And then for those of us that are in leadership positions that we're serving in the organization, just modeling that also. What does it look like for us to be able to walk away from something and enjoy time with family and friends? And I haven't always done the best of that. I've canceled vacations because of work, and it's not a good thing to do. It's not something that I recommend. But I also use that as a teaching point to say, hey, look, don't do that.
Right.
The work is going to be here. It will be here when you get back.
Thank you for sharing those wonderful strategies. How about you, Sherry? What are some of the strategies you use when you are sort of pushed out of balance?
I also think it's really important for self-reflection because sometimes the pressure to perform is coming from within as opposed to outside influences. Feeling like I have to be the last one to leave at the end of the day because then I'm showing my team that I'm
Mm.
here for everybody. I'm doing everything I can for everyone. But it took a couple of years for me to get to that realization that a lot of that pressure was coming from within. And so I think it's important to really take time to assess yourself and make sure that the time that you're spending at work is worthwhile and isn't causing you a detriment as well. I also am a big, huge fan of the No Fridays in the summer. This is probably the first summer that I didn't work on Fridays purposefully. And I disconnected. I took put my phone away because I'm home with family. So if anybody needs me, they're here. So I didn't do work for almost all of Friday, almost all of Saturday. And then like Sunday night, I would check emails just to know what I'm walking into on Monday. And so there was a sense of kind of calm and accomplishment for myself for the summer to be able to really make a conscious effort to disconnect. And so that's something that I've been working really hard on. Again, having done this for a lot of years, it's something that I just find more value in. But like you had said too, so much of our work is seasonal. I know you use the word cycles. We talk about seasons, especially in a high school, because you have the fall seasons and it goes with sports and that kind of stuff. And so I know that during the school year, I'm probably more of a 70-30 split. And I'm comfortable with that and I'm okay with that because I have kids that are away at college. They're not home anyway. There's games that have to be done. There's things that have to be done. And then during summers, I feel better than taking that time off and going on vacation, spending the time with the family because then everyone's there and available. And so I just think those kinds of things are really important. And I think it's okay to know yourself and to be able to see how you do your seasons and see, how much time you're spending, as long as you just kind of continue to monitor yourself and make sure what you're doing is healthy for you and your role.
Yeah, and I love what you talked about with season. So it's like you know from living through the opening of school that
Mhm.
it won't feel like this forever, or closing school. And then, there are other seasons in a school building that have a little bit less of a cadence of sort of frenetic pace, and I think sometimes, particularly if you're highly effective in your role, people don't perceive or they don't see when you're out of balance. We don't make it visible.
Mhm.
I know that I sense when I'm out of balance, and I love Dr. Lewis Phillips. I'm a compulsive communicator. And what that means is I tend to respond very quickly on email, which is a good thing from a perspective of if you're looking to get an answer from me, you'll get it quickly. The challenge is I don't always give myself the gift of time to really consider and think about things. I know that enough about myself. So when I find myself doing that compulsive or sort of frenetic communication, that's a sign to me I'm out of balance. I'm feeling overwhelmed by how much communication is coming at me. And I'm just trying to sort of answer stuff and move on, answer stuff and move on. So it's also that recognizing when you're out of balance and saying, okay, what do I need to do to pull back in? So that's actually a great segue as we sort of move toward the end of our time together. But we have a listener question that I'd love to get your thoughts on before we close. So, new teacher, beginning of the career, is asked, how can I manage a work-life balance while I'm also trying to build strong relationships with parents? And all of my parents are emailing me after school hours, right? So sort of their desire to communicate with me is sort of in conflict with when I'm available. So Sherry, you live this every day. You're school based. Can you take a stab at answering this new teacher's question?
Sure, absolutely. I think one of the most positive things that came out of COVID is the ability to meet with people virtually. And it's taken away that travel time and then need to do appointments at specific times. And so we found like when we offer a parent, well, can you do a virtual meeting, during your lunchtime or maybe closer to the end of the school day or a little after the school day, and they don't have to leave work to be able to meet with me or meet with the teacher, then sometimes they're more likely to be able to engage in that two-way conversation. And then depending on your personal situation, I've offered phone calls to parents in the evening, but I've set boundaries around that call. So I can speak to you at 6 o'clock, but I've got about 10 minutes. So we can talk for 10 minutes. And then if we need to continue, then we'll have to continue that conversation during the school day tomorrow or the next day. But I've family commitments and that kind of stuff so that I'm giving a little bit to the community and to my families, but also still, I feel like still maintaining some level of boundaries. Because I think sometimes giving up that 10 minutes in the evening can make your Thursday so much better because now you've had that two-way conversation with the teacher and you have a different student showing up the next day, or with a parent, and then you have a different student sometimes showing up the next day when there's some accountability at home. And so sometimes just giving a little bit can make a difference for you in your day. And then we've had to not be for teachers to not be afraid to ask your administrators for time as well. So this parent can only talk to me at 2 o'clock, but I'm teaching at 2 o'clock. Is there some, can I get coverage for class so I can have this conversation during the school day? And we do that all the time and provide coverage. And whether it's an administrator going up and coveraging or using a resident sub, there's always a way to kind of help make things happen. So we just really encourage teachers to talk to their administrators to try to make some concessions to try to make that communication happen, because the more we communicate with families, the better things go in our classrooms.
Yeah, I think you mentioned two things that I want to just build on and then ask Dr. Lurch-Phillips if he had any additional thoughts. So number one is the evening phone call. I think again, I'm mindful. I would not personally give my personal number. So I'd make sure I'm using some either Google Voice or some sort of number that you can have, I would say 99% of people will respect that boundary and not abuse it, but it's for the 1% that we have to be mindful of. But I also like this point of acknowledgement that you brought up. And so one of the strategies I have used when a parent is sort of keyed up, right, in the evening, and I'm a parent, so I get it. I've come home from work. I finally had a time to talk to my kid about their day. It's 8:30 and I'm concerned about something and I'm going to fire off an email. Now, my recommendation to any families listening is save that email to go out at 7 a.m. That's the first thing. But if it is an urgent thing and you need to get it off your chest, I know that one of the things I've done, depending on the issue, is I have sometimes acknowledged the email in the evening and said, I happen to be checking email. This is really outside my workday. I will get back to you first thing in the morning. Mm-hmm. And just some, so it depends on the circumstance. But I do think it's important that we protect that time, but also be responsive. And I love the strategies you come up with. Eric, is there anything you'd add on to this?
Yeah, just to add to that, I think, boundaries is key. And again, going back to advocating for self. So part of it, I would say, is just be very clear with families. Because of other obligations that I have outside of the workday, I'm not always able to respond to you in the evening. However, maybe I think about like if you're taking a grad class and you have evening classes twice a week. On Mondays and Wednesdays, I'm available to call back families, if you're available to speak at that time. And then again, a Google number, I would use that. I wouldn't give my personal number out. But I think setting some very clear time frames with families so that they know, okay, I'm going to email them at 7, but they've already told me they're probably not going to see it until the next day. And I think that's, fairness to the family, but it's also fairness to you. Because once you let that genie out of the bottle, it's really hard to get it back in. And because as educators, we want to be there for our families and we want to engage families, we can find ourselves on all the time. So I think it's setting those very clear limits. Twice a week, I'm available for phone calls in the evening during this time period. And then just letting folks know that, you typically are not going to hear from me after, and give yourself a reason, 5 o'clock. We have many young teachers that are they have second jobs and things like that. So, or they're in grad school and they have families. So we want to make sure that you're balancing it out so that you don't feel overwhelmed, and realizing that it's okay to do that. It's okay to do that.
And there'll be times as an administrator, if I have a family who continues to, request from a teacher to speak to them in the evening because they can't get to them in the day, I'll have a conversation with a teacher about kind of the information they want to share and potentially do that phone call for them, since there are more nights that I'm here than not, especially during sports seasons and those kinds of things. And so try to offer kind of that buffer for the family so that they feel heard and listened to, but without having to encroach on the personal time of the teaching staff too.
Yeah, I think it's sort of that tension point between all of the tools we have for the immediacy of communication and the need to have sort of a way to protect yourself is so important. You guys gave great strategies. So that brings us to the end of our show today. I want to first take an opportunity to thank both of you for your time Thank you for really chatting with us about work-life balance, which is something we are perpetually in pursuit of and will never achieve. But we will continue to sort of find a way to gain more equilibrium through the cycle of our work and our lives, and recognize that it's a very normal part of the work experience, and just sort of trying to walk through the world together and feel like we have enough time to nourish ourselves and contribute in meaningful ways into our work setting. So for our last sort of final sort of thing for the day, if you both could offer one piece of advice to someone who is leveling up in their chosen field or passion, what would it be? So it doesn't have to be about work-life balance. It's sort of what would be sort of something you would want to anyone listening out there who is trying to invest in their own career development. So Sherry, we'll go with you first.
Just to remember that you're not doing this in a vacuum and you're not alone. And so you're kind of find your support system within your school setting or within the community. And when you find yourself struggling, to reach out to those people, make sure you have a mentor or a colleague or someone that you know that you can go to when you need to, so that you feel like you have that support, whether you're at home or at school. It's just really important to make sure that you surround yourself with people that can support you.
Thank you so much. Great advice. And Dr. Loris Phillips, give you the last word.
So you could be the most knowledgeable person in the room, and you could have wonderful background and experiences, but if you don't know how to interact and treat people with kindness, respect, and empathy, you're not going to be as successful as you would be if you did have those skills. So I think, always being mindful of how you're interacting and treating colleagues, students, their families, those around you, everybody in that building, doesn't matter what their role is. That really does play a big part. And don't do it because people are watching. Do it because it's the right thing to do, and people will see that.
Thank you both for sharing your perspective. Such wise words. That really we have to take care of ourselves in order to take care of everybody else. And that's sort of the nature of what we do. So thank you for your answers to that question, but really all of the questions today. What a rich discussion we've had. And that wraps up our episode of the Leveling Up Learning Series. We hope that you found our exploration today of work-life balance informative, if not validating, and that you have a couple new strategies in your toolkit that you can use as you pursue the work. So until next time, we'll be back in October with another topic. Please keep thriving in your careers, and don't forget to share and like this podcast. Thank you.